Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Hidden Wealth TV, the show dedicated to helping you discover and uncover your hidden wealth. I'm your host, Kristin Oakley, and joining me in the studio, we have Chuck Oliver. He is the founder and wealth strategist at The Hidden Wealth Solution. And if you have been wanting to know how you can avoid Washington's war on your wealth, you are not going to want to miss today's show. Chuck, my friend, it's great to be back in the studio with you. How are you this week?
I'm great, Kristin. It's great to be back with you.
Well, thank you. And I know that this is a topic you shared with me before the show that you love to talk about. It's your favorite thing to talk about, so buckle up, get ready. You're in for a treat.
Yeah. You can't be aware of what you've not been made aware of. And fortunately, having a Washington insider to hear what's coming down the pike is really helpful to help people prepare properly.
For sure. Well, I want to start with just the title of the show, because that's pretty strong language. Declaring that Washington has a war on our wealth.
Yeah.
Set that up for us.
You know, when you think about it, it used to be incentivized to, there was an incentive to save money towards retirement, like in your traditional kind of tax-deferred accounts, as I call them, kind of the tax-me-later accounts.
Right, so let's name them. 401ks,
401k, IRAs, 403bs, 457s.
Traditional IRAs, yes.
Simple IRAs. Basically, have this thought in mind that you're going to retire in this lower tax bracket. And that's why you want to defer taxes while you're in this higher tax bracket. And the reality is, that's not a reality. It's the opposite. And so what Washington's doing, right? You have two choices. You can either cut spending or you can raise taxes. Clearly, they're not going to be cutting spending.
Unfortunately,
we're 50% ahead of the deficit spending of where we already were in deficit spending from just last year. And when you think about this, and this is a pretty startling statistic, that every 100 days, our national deficit is going up $1 trillion.
Every 100 days.
Every 100 days.
Equals $1 trillion. That is just astounding.
And if people, I used to teach a workshop that you like with a visual of what $1 trillion is compared to $1 billion or what have you, and it's
staggering.
Staggering, right?
Yeah.
It's almost not comprehensible.
Right. Makes you fall out of your chair.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For sure.
So many thousands of dollars per
way.
second. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. So, okay, their war on our wealth. Basically, this is what's really frustrating about this, because most folks have the majority of their wealth saved up in these types of tax-deferred accounts, and nothing's more discouraging than knowing that you've worked hard your whole life, you've been a good saver, you've put money away. We were told back in the day that using these types of tax-deferred accounts when they first came out was a really good thing for us, because supposedly when we were in retirement and would pull the money out, we would be in a lower tax bracket. But we're finding that that's not necessarily the case. And so why is it so important for folks to understand and pay attention to their potential future tax bill in retirement?
It's a timely conversation because so much jockeying is happening in Washington right now to change the rules, right? Which we've seen a series of rule changes now with Secure Act 1.0, Secure Act 2.0. The government not understanding, the inherited RMDs, requirement of distributions. I mean, and then like changing the rules, changing the restrictions, changing the regulations. There's so much that's being proposed right now in order for somebody to really properly remove their money from the tax system or out of the grasp of Washington is under threat. So they're talking about changing the capital gain tax laws, which we'll talk about. They talk about changing obviously we're in the greatest likely tax sale of most people's lifetimes, right? With before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act sunsets, where everybody's tax rates are gonna jump about 3%, and then the standard deduction is gonna get cut in half. And
I just want to say for that, the sunset is set to happen at the end of 2025, beginning of 2026. So what you're saying is if Congress does nothing, tax rates are going to go back up.
Go right back up. And where they were, so if you look at where tax rates were, they were about 30% higher to the average consumer back in the kind of late 90s, 2000s than where they are now. But they're about to go back to where they were and higher, especially with the standard deduction getting cut in half. So everyone, regardless of that promise that no one other than those making over $400,000 would see a tax increase, which we've all seen that through inflation anyway, is actually not factual. You're going to see everybody's taxes go up here in no short order in a matter of months.
Well, and this note right here, right? The new $8 trillion proposed budget includes over $4 trillion of new taxes, as if we aren't already taxed enough. Talk about that.
Yeah, so, the recent budget proposal came out at what is right now forecasting we're between 7.23 trillion. Some people are saying it's really loaded with things that aren't being calculated. That's going to put it closer to 8 to 10 trillion. But inside of that is over 4 trillion of just new tax proposals. And some of those tax proposals, which are going to impact, as I'm sure we'll talk about on the program, it's going to impact a lot of real estate investors, a lot of business owners that go to sell their practice. It's going to impact all of us that have saved money in tax deferred accounts, especially with the proposals of the regulation changes, which we'll talk about. And people need to take time to really understand what these changes are going to mean to them. And they don't, it's already confusing enough to understand required minimum distributions, right? As you hit a certain age, right, you have to pay with a certain formula, take a certain amount out of these not yet taxed accounts.
Right.
But it's going to become even more confusing when it's going to be means tested as far as what somebody can do or what they can't do based on how well they've saved, because that's what's being proposed. So if you've done too well in saving, you're not going to be able to do more Roth conversion. You're not going to be able to keep other than up to a certain amount in your tax deferred accounts, because if it's tax deferred or tax free, the government wants to find a way, or Washington in this case wants to find a way to get to that tax and get to it as quickly as they can.
Right. So what do we do about this? Right? I mean, and I know you have built your entire company. This is what the Hidden Wealth Solution is all about. You are passionate about helping folks be able to mitigate and eliminate that tax bill as much as possible, and you have tons of strategies at your disposal. But I think before we get to that, which I know the whole rest of the show is going to be focused on these solutions, I want you to share what sets you guys apart, the fact that you are tax planners, because I think there's a lot of confusion between tax preparation, tax planning. Talk about that piece.
Probably the best analogy I've heard is, right, most tax professionals are archaeologists, right? They're studying history, right? Artifacts, fossils, if you will. And what's needed today are tax architects, right? That's the pre-planning of how to build something, right? And if you're looking to build a way to get your money out of the tax system, out of Washington's crosshairs, you need to have a proactive approach. So one of the things we did a long time ago is we said, look, let's bring an entire tax team into our practice, where these are folks that don't just, check the boxes and meet the deadlines and tell you what you owe. They actually are positioned to teach you how much less you have to pay. And by understanding how that works in conjunction with our wealth team, now we have actually even incorporated the legal team, but the legal team, the tax team, and the retirement team are all cohesive. We're all synchronized. We're all kind of singing from the same hymnal, as they say.
And so from that perspective, how do you help folks then figure out what their potential tax bill might be in retirement? Yeah,
most people don't know what that bill's going to be, right? So we actually created a calculator. So one of the first steps when we meet with a client is we actually get some initial data, run that tax calculation, and it's pretty sobering. Clients are pretty taken back because, we forget that, and I know we've had a lot of case studies on this, as you and I have talked about on different programs, but what people don't realize, depending on your age and how much you've saved and what the tax rate ends up being, depending on how much longer you're going to have over somebody else to defer taxes, what you've saved in your retirement accounts today, for most people, especially if you're in your mid-60s, is at least the tax you will pay or more. So if you've saved $1 million towards retirement, your taxes will be $1 million or more at today's tax rates. So first understanding where they are as far as what they're being exposed to, then we can get to the solutions of what best fits them in conjunction with our tax team as well as our wealth team to put that plan together.
Well, what would you say to someone who's wondering what their current tax bill might be and what they're currently exposed to?
Here's a good rule of thumb. So depending on your age, right? So let's say you're in your mid-40s, right? If you're in your mid-40s and you're not sure, it's pretty much 2.5 times what you've saved towards retirement will be the tax you'll pay at a best case scenario. If you're mid-50s, we've ran so much of this analysis and helped people in these different age groups. It's about 1.25 of what you saved, right, will be in the form of taxation. And then if you're in your mid-60s, it's pretty much 1-to-1. If you've saved $500,000 or $1 million, your taxes will be at least $500,000 or $1 million or more. And that's somewhat sobering for people because they forget about the different aspects of the taxes. It's not just the taxes the government forces you to take out, but when we work with you, we're able to show you what they're going to force you to take out. But then when where you reinvest it, they get to tax it again. And then what you end up inadvertently leaving to your children gets taxed again. So it's a triple tax whammy.
Yeah, And so we want folks to be able to avoid that. So I know you're offering the complimentary personal wealth blueprint. Let our viewers know what they can expect when they call in today.
Yeah, so when you call in and schedule time to meet with our personal wealth planning team, we do what's called a personal wealth blueprint. And this is a conversation where we're able to go through, get a deep dive on some data and go deeper into that data analysis so you can see the tax risk road that you're on. And then you'll also be able to see the tax risk reroutes that you'll be able to avoid. And by doing that, that helps you now have the first key step we find is that if you don't get the taxes right, everything else is going to be inferior. Get the taxes planned in conjunction with the rest of the wealth plan so that way you can see how everything from Social Security to Medicare to covering healthcare costs to cash flow to legacy, all of that fits together. But it starts with the taxes because there is a war out of Washington that's coming for your taxes very quickly.
Chuck, thank you so much for explaining that. And to our viewers at home, we are going to take a quick break, but this is a great opportunity for you to start your journey with the Hidden Wealth Solution to receive your very own complimentary personal wealth blueprint from Chuck and the entire team. All you need to do is call that number on the bottom of your screen, 844-837-3652. Again, this is for no cost, no charge, no obligation, simply an invitation to have a conversation for you to be able to explore what your potential tax bill in retirement might be and what you can begin doing now to mitigate it. If you'd rather not talk to someone right now, but you do have your smartphone handy, if you simply pull it out, you can open up that camera app, just point, click, and scan the QR code that you see down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. That will take you over to a landing page, ask you a few short, simple questions, and then a member of the team will reach out to connect with you to schedule your complimentary meeting that way as well. More on today's episode of how you can avoid Washington's war on your wealth right after this.
I was kind of a product of the tech boom and bust at the turn of the millennium. You know, at the time I was not a financial professional. I already had one child. Our first son had been born and our second son was just born. My banker Larry said, why don't you just move maybe X amount over to bonds? At that time, bonds were actually not paying that bad. They were paying like 6 or 7%. Like, nah, Larry, I'm just gonna kind of stay and keep doing what I'm doing. And then of course, you know, things changed, things shifted very quickly. And so as a result of that, I got very passionate about really just becoming what I really wanted to be, right? Almost like the Gandhi quote, you must become the change you want to see. And so I went on a quest to study from the Tony Robbins of the world, understanding the Ritz-Carlton philosophy, self-educated, right? I went out and bought all the alternative products and the common products and tested them and compared them. And so as I kind of made that transition, it was unique because everybody else kind of went to the big box store brokerages, as I call them. And I just chose to remain independent because I kind of felt that there was this void that just wasn't being filled. It was kind of more of a transactional experience for the consumer. It was not a relational experience. And so that's where we kind of coined the mantra, deeper with few than shallow with many. And so it wasn't about gathering the masses. It was about really creating a real unique experience and a quality experience for the client. You have a choice in life, right? You can either be really bitter about a situation or choose to get better in it.
Welcome back to Hidden Wealth TV, where we are discovering and uncovering your hidden wealth, specifically as it relates to your potential tax bill in retirement. I'm your host, Kristin Oakley. I'm here with Chuck Oliver, the founder and wealth strategist at The Hidden Wealth Solution. And we've been talking really today, Chuck, about how folks can avoid Washington's war on their wealth. I think it's interesting. I know that you specialize in doing this for folks, really helping people make sure they can mitigate that tax bill. There's a lot of income out there that the IRS cannot touch.
Right.
And you always say that when it comes to taxes, there's actually a two-tier tax code, if you will. So explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, a former appeals court judge, Judge Hand, said there's two tax systems in this country, one for the informed and one for the uninformed, but they're both tax systems. Mm-hmm. And so you're right, there are things, I don't want to say the government won't touch them, Washington won't touch them, only because they seem to find a way to touch them by changing the rules.
Or they could change the rules in the future.
Could change them.
We have to go with what we have today, right?
Right, with what we know today.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, it's what major corporations, one in particular strategy, and I think of this as a way to break this out two ways. One, where do you put money so you can insulate it from the IRS and from Uncle Sam? Mm-hmm. And then what about the money that's not yet insulated from the IRS, Uncle Sam in Washington? How do you get that money untaxed? So let's talk about the things of, where you can put money now towards not going to be taxed.
Okay.
So sometimes it's referred to as the rich man's Roth or the Roth alternative. Ironically, it's not known very well. It's under a section of the tax code called 7702 and 72E. And it's a place where you can get tax-deferred growth, but you also can get tax-free access, and then you can also have tax-free transfer of legacy. And it's actually using a special form, we like to refer to it as special design insurance contracts, as a Roth alternative. So you're not designing it, you're designing to live it, not just leave it. And that's an area that some of the former and former presidents to major corporation CEOs that people would recognize the names if I gave them, to Big Ten football and basketball coaches, ACC basketball coaches who I've all spoken with that have these plans. But they're foreign to most people.
So again, I've heard this statistic before. I think it's like 95% of Congress people have a 7702, and yet the majority of Americans have never even heard of this.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
But clearly they know something that the rest of the world doesn't. So this is why we need to educate on it, right?
They didn't want to pay taxes, so they created the rules to avoid having to pay taxes themselves, but without the limitation that it's kind of like when healthcare got overruled, right? Where it's like, okay, well, Congress doesn't need to take the health plan, but you and I should take the health plan. It's kind of the same thing. Like you guys should go ahead and gals should do this 401k thing, or maybe this Roth thing that most people's income's too high, or they can't only put away $7,000-8,000 a year. But this has unlimited funding capability, where you can put. We have clients putting anywhere from a couple $1,000s a month to hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to shelter and protect that money, right? That savings from any future tax, right? There's no required minimum distributions. There's no capital gains tax. You're not locked out of your money till you're 59 and a half. You're not forced out of your money depending on your birth year at 72, 73, or 75 years of age. And you have upside without downside. And that's so important too, because it has special provisions of which I know there's not time to go into with the program today, but the ability to do something that's sadly what most people haven't been made aware of has helped a lot of our clients.
So I know we can't spend the whole show on this, although I'm sure there's so many questions about 7702s, but who typically is an ideal candidate for something like that?
Typically a high income earner that has someone who's got discretionary cash. Maybe it's somebody who's just got a lot of discretionary cash as a retiree with large pensions. We have a lot of people either saving to get to retirement or finding a way to protect themselves from taxes better through retirement. So for some clients, it's understanding how much of their wealth is going to end up getting passed on to their kids that's going to have a huge tax bill to where they can divert that into something that becomes tax-free from that day forward and ends up letting that money blossom and transfer completely tax-free. It does some other things too with Washington's War on Wealth of getting it out of their taxable estate, which I know we'll talk about all the tax threats that are still coming, but that's part of Washington's War is taxing people when they're dead because you're not a registered voter anymore, and it's much easier to not argue the changes when you're not here to argue them.
Valid point. I think something a lot of folks don't often think about, right? Well, what are some other ways that folks can actually tangibly remove their wealth from Washington?
Yeah, so there's different strategies. Learning ways to create deductions that allowed, and that are all been part of our tax code for centuries, for that matter, let alone several decades of years. Being able to use things that create deductions that allow them to offset the tax liability that they would normally be exposed to by trying to, let's say, do like a traditional Roth conversion, I think you're alluding to. So you've got Roth conversion, where a lot of people look at that and say, well, my tax person, or when I looked at it, because they're only seeing it through one lens, it looks like the taxes, I just don't want to deal with the taxes. Well, if there was a way, for those of you watching, if there's a way, which many of you have this is like, wow, I didn't even know this was possible. But if there's a way that you could use deductions that offset conversion taxes so you didn't have to pay the taxes out of your pocket, we've not had anybody that didn't like that approach.
I bet, for sure. And I bet some people watching, if this is news, if you've never heard this before, you're going, wait a second, what? That's even possible? I mean, how often does that happen when you meet with folks?
We get that question a lot, like, hey, I thought I heard you talk about, like, one strategy is where we can create a deduction by using the tax code that allows up to a 10 times deduction. So if someone's using, say, $100,000, using the least amount of their capital, it actually has the ability to create $1 million tax deduction, of which you can use a high percentage of that just in the same year, right? The first year. But then you keep the ability for the rest of that deduction to come for the next 5 years. And now you can actually get rid of for a lot of clients, it helps them use the least amount of capital to get their money out of Washington, right, with that exposure, and get it over from the tax me later side to the tax me never side.
Tax me later, we don't like. We want tax me never.
That's right. The tax me never is much preferred.
Yes, for sure. But I think, I'm so grateful that you're shedding light on these strategies, because to your point, most folks are uninformed, and everything you're talking about is perfectly legal. It's there in the tax code. I think folks forget that when the tax code was originally written, it was designed to help us pay the least amount of tax possible. People have forgotten that. People just think, oh, this is just the way it is. It stinks. I got to pay it. But that's not necessarily the case.
Two tax systems, right? So if you're on the informed side, and that's what's great about having a tax team. So we have proactive strategic tax savings CPAs, right? So these are folks that support our clients because they understand what their role is, and they understand what our role is. And because we're getting on the same page, now there's not the concern for the client to say, those of you that take advantage of these programs, you don't have that concern of, hey, I hope my tax person understands this. News bulletin. They don't, because if they did, they would have already talked to you about these strategies. So by getting informed, as you put it, our clients you don't have to have the risk of concern of, is this a viable tax strategy allowed within the tax code? This is all from the tax code, of which I think we shared in another program, right? Where we use your current tax return that you would have just filed, and then we do a diagnostic. And in that diagnostic, what you get to see, like this other client couple, is they unnecessarily paid almost $40,000 of taxes because they didn't know what they didn't know.
Right, and they hadn't engaged in that strategic, proactive tax planning process.
Right.
Well, that alone should make people want to be able to be connected. And, I think to your point, if you're already working with another financial advisor or with your CPA and they are not having these kinds of conversations with you, it's time to get a second opinion. And the reality is you can't get a second opinion from the same person who gave you the first. So this is why Chuck and the team of the Hidden Wealth Solution are standing by. They want to help you. This is for no cost, no charge, no obligation. But if you want to dive deeply into your potential tax bill in retirement, we encourage you, pick up the phone and call 844-837-3652 to schedule your complimentary Zoom call and begin your personal wealth blueprint. Or again, you're welcome to scan that QR code and that will get you connected as well. More on Hidden Wealth TV right after this.
So people today feel more confused than ever before, right? When you feel confused, right, you feel isolated. You feel kind of like you're on your own little island. You just don't really know what to do. So then that gives you that feeling of feeling powerless. And then people just become kind of overanalysis paralysis. They'll just sit back, and the best decision for them is just to not make a decision. And so then they're kind of stuck. And so what are they looking for? They're looking for direction. So my passion is when we can have a client, which hence the name Hidden Wealth, and help them discover and uncover like all these things where we've gone before them, self-educated, tested, some worked, some didn't, etc. But then we found the formula of like the proper strategies, and then in the most strategic order, people then have that direction. It gives them a huge amount of confidence. Once they have that direction, right, and now the confidence, they have this capability that they didn't even realize that was even possible. So direction creates confidence, and confidence creates capability.
Welcome back to Hidden Wealth TV. I'm your host, Kristin Oakley, here with Chuck Oliver, where today we are discussing how you can avoid Washington's war on your wealth. And this is such a timely conversation, Chuck, and I know that there's several proposed changes coming with taxes, with legislation, of course, it being an election year. Gosh, we've had entire conversations just on that alone. Walk our viewers through what are some of the most pressing proposed legislative things going on that they need to be aware of and prepared for from a tax perspective?
Sure, and for those of you at home, really listen into this because a lot of people aren't aware of these things. And when we meet with clients, we make sure that these are right up front and understood. So the estate tax, well, first we have a tax sale. Right now, under the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which is set to sunset here in a number of months, all the tax rates are going to bump up about 3%. And the estate tax exemption is also going to be lowered, right? Right now we're hearing rumors it's probably going to drop in more than half. So some people, their estates are already exposed, or if they look at the compounding effect, will be exposed.
Right.
The big one for those of you that are real estate investors out there that hold rental property, in real estate, they're looking to do away with the 1031 exchange, right? That's where you can kind of defer your gain from one property to another property. But the big thing they're trying to do is change the capital gain tax rates to as high as 44.6%. So they're going to double for some people. The other big thing they're trying to take away is the ability to do Roth conversion. So depending on how well you've saved, it's going to be the congressional mandated limit is what they're calling it in Washington right now. If you've saved over a certain threshold, not only will you not be able to make a Roth conversion, let alone a contribution, but you also will be forced at any age when you're over that mandated limit.
And what is the limit? Mandated
the limit we haven't
proposing?
heard what it's going to be, but let's just say it's $2 million.
Sure, right.
So if it's over whatever, say you have 2.2 million. So if whatever you're over that limit, you have to take 50% of that out that year and pay the tax on it, or if it's tax-free, take it and now put it somewhere where it becomes taxable. This is the Washington's war on our wealth. For business owners, the corporate tax rate is going to jump from 21 back to 28%. The qualified business income deduction, which is a 20% deduction for sole proprietors, partners, partnerships, and S corporations, that's going to go away. So you've got all these risks of what's being proposed that will be taken away. The biggest one is likely to go back, and for those of you watching, to do a Roth conversion. It used to be prior to Obama in 2010 lifting this, if your income was at a certain level, not only could you not do a Roth contribution, but you also couldn't do a conversion. And people forgot that. In fact, remember, Obama gave you 2 years to spread the tax over, 2010 and 2011, because they wanted tax revenue so badly. They came up with every concoction they could come up with. So this is when you're, not able to argue the tax bill, or when you can't change something that's now been proposed that's gone into effect. Don't miss that opportunity. When we meet with you, we teach you the things that you can implement today.
When are these proposed changes set to potentially go into effect?
A lot of it's going to have a lot to do with the outcome of this election.
Right.
And unfortunately, some things could happen much faster, especially with what's already been proposed of the additional $4 trillion of new taxes in just this Biden administration's new proposed budget.
I mean, this is...
You got to pay for it from somewhere, right? So you might as well get it from tax.
I mean, even though I deal in this space and I've heard a lot of these things, even just sitting in here, I'm flabbergasted. So I can only imagine how you are feeling at home. But we don't want to leave you on a sour note. So Chuck, tell folks how they can get some help with this.
Yes. So when you schedule a meeting with us, and it's a personal wealth blueprint, one of the first things we look at are your taxes, right? So we want to make sure that you understand the tax risk that you're exposed to. So then we can find the things that are most suitable through our fiduciary team of the strategies that would best fit you to remove your wealth from Washington and insulate your income from the IRS and from Uncle Sam.
Chuck, thank you so much for your time, for your knowledge, and for your expertise. And we hope that this has been helpful and beneficial for you at home. To get your personal wealth blueprint, 844-837-3652. Don't wait. We encourage you to call today. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back with you next time on Hidden Wealth TV.